What are some ways that teams can build trust quickly? Are there any tangible things that teams can do to do that?
I think the first thing is getting to know on a personal level the people on the team. So actually taking the time to understand them, their ways of working, I would say their strengths and also their non-strengths. I often think about, and I guess my follow-up part to that is, and then appreciating them for their strengths and their non-strengths.
Mm,
I often think about people with different working styles and how that can create tension in the team without having that language to put around it. It can create a lot of dysfunction and
mm,
toxicity if you don't understand why someone's working the way that they're working. I'll give you an example. I was working with a leader who had a lot of really fast working style. So in the Clifton Strengths language, she had high activator, achiever, maximizer, competition. These words, these strengths might not mean a lot to everybody if you're not familiar with the Clifton Strengths
mm,
language, but she was really fast paced. And until she discovered the strengths and put some language around and started to work and appreciate other strengths, she didn't realize that she actually had a bias around people working fast, being fast, speaking fast, and she would judge them on an interview based on their pace. And
mm.
so this was pre-COVID. She'd meet them at the front, walk them to the interview room. By the time they sat down, she already knew that whether they were going to fit in or not based on how fast they walked, how fast they talked, and whether they could match her pace. And it
Right.
wasn't until she opened her eyes to that blind spot that
Mm,
she realized that doesn't mean that they can't contribute really well. And in fact, that slower pace, that more thoughtfulness, that deliberative might bring a more analytical lens to something that I'm activated on. So it helped her to appreciate the differences as advantages. And someone's work style being completely different didn't mean that they weren't a high performer. It just meant that they took more time to think things through. They maybe assessed the risk more. They were more thoughtful in their responses. So she learned to appreciate that more by opening her eyes to it. So I guess to come back to your question, how do you build trust? I think the first thing is understanding that differences are advantages and that everyone is different. And they're going to bring a cognitive diversity to their role. Two people, same role, similar background, completely different working styles, different strengths. So, really bringing that respectful understanding that differences are advantages in a team,
yeah.
that we those differences to make a strong team rather than everyone thinking and acting the same is really going to benefit the team. And that's where the trust starts because that's where most of the problems come from. Why
Yeah.
did he do this? Why didn't he do this? Why is he not getting back to me fast enough? That's where most of the challenges come from.
Yeah. And there's an interesting one in the context of the lens that we see the world in and how we might judge those that are different to us. And I think it highlights the shadow side of our strengths because it's often our greatest strengths. The shadow side of those strengths is actually what our weakness might be. And I'm a big believer in teaming where it's all about understanding our similarities and our differences so we can value those things as well. Yeah. So in the
Absolutely.
context of that, like how did teams best leverage the strengths of each other? And also, I guess, the lesser strengths that you mentioned too.
Yeah, it's so fun when you get to really get crunchy with this
Mm,
because if you think about a team and you think about a profile, there are going to be areas where we're the same and there's areas where we're different. There's going to be people in the team that have a different lens and they bring a completely different perspective that might be a blind spot for us. So when you really start getting into it, it's that kind of appreciation of each other's differences as advantages. It's
mm,
understanding where we're the same and where we're different. It's understanding where we've all got blind spots. I've seen
mm.
teams that are all really strong on relationship building themes, and yet they don't have a lot of influencing themes. And there might be someone on the team with strong influence. So then they need to create some strategies or accountability plans about how to leverage intentionally the strengths of that person to be able to go to that person and say, what are we missing? We're not seeing the world through that lens. Who else do we need to tell about this great work that we're doing? Who else needs to know about it? How do we do our own PR? So that is really powerful. And then coming down to power of two, like having complementary partnerships. So my best partners, I've got a lot of the influencing themes and the people themes. My best partners are the ones with the strategic thinking themes, the deliberative, the analytical, the ones that can bring some of the data to some of the strategy that I'm working on. So it's about finding your complementary partners, the people that have strengths in your areas of non-talent, and then it can get really fun. And then using that conversation around, you get the best of me when, you get the worst of me when, this is what I need from you. You can count on me to do this. Then you can start to leverage each other's strengths, start to recognize and see each other's strengths in action. And then it gets really fun. And I would say when it comes to high performance, a strengths-based approach to development and performance does not mean ignoring weaknesses. What I've noticed is that you have more permission to have tough conversations when you're strengths-based, when you really truly appreciate someone's differences as advantages and what they bring and contribute to the team. It's also easier to say, hey, I need to have a tough conversation with you about where this wasn't fulfilling performance and engagement, and where this really did get in the way for you and for others. And because you're strengths-based and you appreciate each other, it almost permissions those tough performance conversations even more. Whereas if you don't have that strengths-based approach, it feels like everything's punitive, everything's judgmental, the feedback's not really tangible. Back in the past, it's not future focused, and it's really hard to get clear on what the feedback is. But when you put a strengths language to it, as you say, it could also be that talent that's showing up in a negative way to someone. It allows them to tweak it.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, even using strengths-based language so that people can be really specific about what's positive, because sometimes positive feedback isn't great because it's so vague and not specific. So often we can take a strengths-based approach, but also lean on our strengths in terms of how we can help those strengths with the areas that are weaknesses for us as well, and being aware of that. But I think it's important not to be blind or just completely ignore weaknesses. I think that's a bit of a misconception about us taking a strengths-based approach, that we don't talk about weaknesses, and it's still important also.